darling. Hello. Hello.
Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you my February reading wrap-up. So February was a bit of a funny month because I just kind of disappeared off of here for a couple of weeks due to a number of kitchen accidents I had. I messed up both of my hands quite badly, one with a knife, the other with a very, very, very hot bread oven. And I was really grumpy and I didn't feel like being chipper and talking on video, so I didn't, but I'm back now. I do think that some of those kitchen accidents did detract from my reading a little bit. However, I did manage to finish 7 books and I DNF'd one. I am currently in the middle of like 4 books that I really wanted to finish for the end of the month, which didn't happen, so you'll get to see some of those next month. I've just had to jump up and get my stats, but I do have them now. So the month of February was a real interesting one. There have been a couple of like holidays that I've been on, like short holidays where the book shopping was exquisite. I have one more of those coming up in March, and then I think it's time for a book buying ban after that. So keeping that in mind, for my TBR, I started the month at 1,262 books, and I ended the month at 1,289 books. My physical TBR started at 1,033 books and ended at 1,061 books. That's not terribly surprising. I did that to myself. And then in terms of what I actually read this past month, I read 7 books. 2 of those were physical books, 3 of them were ebooks, and most of 2 of them were audiobooks. 4 of those books were ARCs, 1 was from the library, 2 of them were owned, and I did have 1 singular DNF for the month. And in terms of the genres that I read 1 fantasy book, 4 horror books, 1 nonfiction book, and 1 kind of literary fiction-y book. So as usual, to start off with the DNF, I ended up DNFing The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This is the second of Rachel Gillig's books that I have DNF'd, and I think that she's just not really an author for me. I know that she's super popular, and I really wanted to like this. I was actually buddy reading this with my sister, who I don't think loved it either. She did finish it though, and Scottish husband, who read about half of it. I read about 18%. I think ultimately what this comes down to is, one, I'm not a huge fan of romantasy because often I find male romantic leads in a lot of fantasy books and stuff like that to be deeply, deeply underwhelming. I hated this man from the brief introduction that we got from him. That may have changed later on, but I wasn't hugely interested in continuing on to see if that would change. I also felt like this book, while the world building was actually really interesting, I really liked those elements, the fantasy elements of that. I felt like the characters were like living in a different world, if that makes sense. It felt like this was 2 books kind of mushed together. I think that she's just not for me, and that's fair enough. So while The Night and the Moth is a very, very popular book that I did not like, the first book that I read in February is a very, very popular book that I absolutely loved, and that was The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. I actually listened to this one on audiobook. I don't know what it was about this. I initially was not interested. I thought it would be kind of like a romantasy type thing that I'm just not hugely interested in. I did not realize that Antonia Hodgson is actually a crime writer. I did not realize that this would be a hugely like conspiracy-based murder mystery, like magical tournament type thing, and I absolutely loved it. In this book, we follow a young woman named Nima, who, while incredibly intelligent and does very, very well in her scholarly works, is not the most popular person in the world. And she is someone who doesn't have friends, doesn't have court connections, and one day she decides to do something that will elevate her place in society, but will be very, very detrimental to another person. And we flash forward to how that decision has affected her life in a very, very positive way. However, she does have to deal with those consequences. The current emperor's term of 24 years of rule is at an end, and there is going to be a competition to see who will take over for him next. And Nima ends up getting entangled in this competition and a murder mystery at the heart, and she has to uncover what is going on. I really love this. This is like a breath of fresh air. It was something that I didn't really know what I was getting into when I started. I basically read it because everyone else that I knew who had read it absolutely loved it, so I thought I'd give it a try. And I'm really, really glad that I did, because this probably would have passed me by otherwise. But the world building in this book is wonderful. I absolutely adore Nima as a character. She's fantastic. And I love the fact that this is a pretty immersive fantasy world. It's got really strong world building and magic and all of that, but it's also incredibly funny. I loved the dialogue, and I loved a lot of the relationships between the characters. You have probably heard about this one if you are someone who's been thinking about reading it. If you are a big fantasy fan, I would definitely recommend this. The audiobook is particularly good. This is going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I think I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. This next book that I read was a digital review copy. This is out now. It is Super Nintendo, How One Japanese Company Helped the World Have Fun, and it's by Kisa McDonald. It's a nonfiction book. It's about Nintendo the company. This was really fun. I really enjoyed it. It is very much a fluff piece. You're not going to be digging into much controversy or anything like that here. But what I really loved about this is that the author obviously has a deep, deep love for Nintendo's games and their franchises, and that really came through in their writing. And it was just a really, really fun, enjoyable read. If you're someone who is a big Nintendo fan, like I am, very much a Nintendo kid here, I think that you will really, really enjoy it. But if you're looking for something that's going to dig a little bit more into like past controversies and maybe the darker side of some of the games and industries and such things, you're not going to find that here. One of the other things that I really liked about this book is that the author splits this into franchises, so each chapter is a different franchise, and I think that this worked really well overall, but there were a couple where I felt like maybe the franchise itself got lost in whatever the author had particularly wanted to talk about. There's one particular chapter, I can't remember what the particular product was, but it was basically when Nintendo was like, it'd be a great idea, let's have people build like physical cardboard models of things, and it was kind of like a big failure. And I don't think that they talked enough about that failure and sort of what happened around that product. It might have just been that there wasn't enough information there and it was more of a vehicle to talk about other things about the company, but that's okay. But I'm a big Pokemon kid and I am very much a Legend of Zelda fan, and I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. It's a nice read, but really only if you are very into Nintendo. Next, I did a buddy read with my friend Carly over on TikTok, and that was for The Staircase in the Woods by Chuck Wendig. I have read some of his stuff in the past, and I really enjoyed it, but this one did not do it for me. So this book follows a group of 5 friends, and they go off camping in the woods one day, and they discover a staircase in the woods. It's kind of there for no real reason. It's random. There's no like ruins around it, like the ruins of a house. One of them goes up the staircase and does not come back. Then we flash forward into the present day. It's, 20, 25 years later, and we follow the 4 remaining friends as one of them brings them all together to find their friend Matt again. I really should have loved this book. I love the concept. I love the sort of the idea, like the creepypastas about staircases in the woods, about liminal spaces and all that kind of thing. I find that really interesting and I really love it. I liked what I read of House of Leaves, and I feel like in a lot of ways maybe this had a lot of inspiration from that. However, I think that what makes this really difficult is I absolutely hated every single character in this book. When I was talking to Carly about this, one thing that she said that really stuck with me is like, there is not a single shred of common sense between any of these people. And I completely understand, like, there's a lot of trauma here. A lot happened after their friend went missing, who's kind of the golden boy of the town, and they were kind of like the druggy burnouts. And I get that there's a lot of trauma. We both totally understood that. But at the same time, these people did not act in a logical fashion. They did not act in a particularly likable fashion. I like characters who are unlikable, but you gotta have something there. And none of these people had that. And I think that because this is such a character-driven book, it just fell really flat for me. I am really glad that I have read other stuff from him before. I really enjoyed The Book of Accidents. If you're looking for something that's very kind of Stephen King-esque, would recommend. And Wanderers I really enjoyed, although I read it during the pandemic. Not my best idea. I really like those books. If I had not read those before reading this one, I probably wouldn't pick up another Chuck Wendig book again. I gave this 3 stars because a lot of the horror elements were fantastic, and I really liked the idea and the concept. It was just those characters, I just couldn't get behind them. Next, I read another digital advanced reading copy, and that was Bodies of Work by Clay McLeod Chapman. I'm a big fan of his. I have read a couple of his books so far, and they are all really fantastic, very weird. This one is a little bit less weird than some of the others. I've read What Kind of Mother and Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, both fantastic. This one was a little bit more toned down. That might be because it's a novella, but it was a really great read. In this book, we follow a man whose name is escaping me at the moment. This is the problem with digital copies. I can't refer back to them. But we follow a man who is elderly and he's a recluse. He is also a serial killer. He had kind of taken up residence in a local church. People felt really bad for him. They allowed him to live there. And he was murdering these young women who came through the church looking for help. And he has this kind of religious delusion that when he finds his 7 muses, he will be able to stop this war that's happening that's killing all of the children. He's had 6 muses so far. He's finding his 7th. So, okay, fine, elderly serial killer story, sure. What makes this book weird and unusual is that the story is actually told from the perspective of the women that he has killed. You get their voices interspersed throughout the story. You get them flashing back to not only their past, but also his own past, why he may be the way that he is. And when he discovers his seventh muse, they decide that they are going to do something about this and stop him from killing her. I really like this. This is super fun. I wouldn't call it like hardcore horror or anything like that. I think that this is something that you can read if you're not a horror fan, if maybe you're interested in like true crime or thrillers or anything like that. But this was super fun. I really enjoyed this one. I gave this 4 stars and I believe it is out in April. So in February I went to Edinburgh, and you have seen the massive book haul that I did. I read the first book off of that stack, and that was Haunted Tales by Adam McQueen. This is a collection of 9 ghosty short stories. It's perfect for winter time, especially around kind of Christmas time, which I always feel is the best time to read ghost stories. And I thought this was fantastic. I really, really loved pretty much all of the stories in this. There are a couple that are particularly strong. I really liked the very first one, which is, I believe, called The Wrong Teletubby. And I also really enjoyed the story called Panic Room, but all of these were really fabulous. Would highly recommend if you're a short story fan, especially if you're looking for something a little bit ghosty and spooky. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. My second audiobook for this month was Butter by Saka Yusuke. I read about 90% of this via audiobook, and then it got returned to the library, so I read the last 10% in my physical copy. I think that some of the dislike for this book comes from the fact that it does feel like it was a little bit mismarketed. It felt like a lot of the marketing around this book, because Waterstones was pushing this really, really hard, and the publisher was pushing this really hard. It feels like a lot of it was saying that this was a thriller, like a serial killer thriller, because it's about a journalist who goes to see a killer in prison, and she kind of falls under her spell and all of that. But it's not. This is a book about misogyny and the roles of women and sort of female relationships with either other women or romantic partners, the roles as mothers and caregivers in Japanese society. In this book, we follow a young woman named Rika, and she is a fledgling journalist, and she kind of gets the score of her life when she manages to land an interview with a woman named Kaji, who is in prison for murdering her elderly lovers. The way that she kind of gets us in with this woman is by asking her about her favorite recipes and the ways that she loves to cook, because Kaji is a woman who is very much enmeshed in the role of kind of caregiver to men. And as Rika begins to fall more and more under Kaji's spell, her sort of relationships with other people and with herself begins to change. So I absolutely adored this book. I think this is going to be one of my favorite books of the year, and I think that one of the reasons for that is I really benefited from a lot of those conversations that were happening about people feeling like this book was mismarketed. I also happen to really enjoy books about sort of women and women in society and misogyny and all of that good kind of thing. It's pretty brutal in some ways, especially with a character like Kaji and sort of the investigation of her character and the way that people have reacted to her. I mean, she is a woman who has been convicted of killing multiple elderly men, and all people in the newspapers and sort of the public seem to be concerned with is the fact that she's not very attractive. She's quite overweight, and she doesn't fit in with kind of the ideal image of a woman, especially a woman who is seducing and presumably murdering these men. And Kaji is a very complicated character, not just because of the murdering. I really love the fact that she is someone who lives so far outside of a sort of feminine role in terms of being a murderer, but she is also someone who very much feels that women should be subservient to men, women should serve men. The reason that women are unhappy is because they're working and they're not like comforting their men, cooking for their men, taking care of their men. And obviously Rika is a woman who has a career, who's trying to further her career, who is someone who does not stay home and cook. She doesn't really have a really serious romantic partner, and she's kind of the opposite of Kaji, and the way that these two women kind of end up getting intertwined is really interesting. I just really love the way that she managed to talk about things like motherhood and fertility and relationships between women and relationships between women and men and sort of gender roles and all of this good stuff without feeling incredibly preachy. It feels like it's done in a really natural way, and I just really adored her writing, and I think the translation is really good. One of the books that I'm reading right now is Hooked, which is her next book, which takes on female friendships, and I'm so beyond hyped. It's so good so far. I'm a huge fan of hers now. Officially, I gave this 5 stars. I just thought it was fantastic. And last but not least is a funny one. I read Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. This is one of my most anticipated books of the year. It is one that was really, really difficult to find, which if you read the new edition that's coming out this month, you will see that there is a reason for that. And I really don't know what to think about this. So Between Two Fires takes place, I believe, in the 1300s during the Black Plague in Normandy, and we follow a disgraced knight named Moth, and he is part of a brigand band, and one day this band stumbles upon a young girl, and Tomas stops some bad things from happening to her, and she says that she speaks to angels, she speaks to saints, and she has a mission, and she has to get to Paris, and she has to get to Avignon. She doesn't know why, but she has this mission, and he's like, I guess I'll come with you. So it's this kind of winding journey through plague-stricken Normandy and France, and a lot of weird stuff happens. It's a very trippy book. It's very, like, fever dreamy. I feel like the characterization in this book is interesting because the young girl is fascinating because she is this young girl who's on a mission. You know, there's a question of, like, is she mad? Is she actually speaking to angels? What's her actual mission? What's going on here? I thought that Tomas, while I liked him as a character, wasn't, you know, particularly deep, and we do follow his perspective throughout the book. But my heart does belong to Père Mathieu, who is a priest who they encounter in a small village and kind of comes with them on their journey, and I absolutely adore him. I really, really loved his characterization and his kind of conflict as a priest that he has in this horrible, horrible time. And I love bits of this. I love the kind of fever dream that these characters experience as they're moving through this plague-stricken world. The world has completely changed around them. However, there was something that was missing from the ending of this book for me, and I think I finally figured out what it was after a couple of days of ruminating. For me, as someone who has read a lot of fantasy, I am very, very annoyed when I feel like the author breaks the rules of their own world and world building. So for example, you know, it's kind of that Deus Ex Machina or whatever it's called, when a character is stuck in a situation and then it's like, oh, we have found the perfect item that will get us out of this that we never knew existed before, or oh, this, you know, magical thing has suddenly happened that we had no kind of concept of before. And I think that this does happen a little bit at the end of the book, but the magic system is religion. It just got a little bit like, okay, we're doing this again and again and again. And I think as someone who is not religious and has never been religious, I think that maybe I just have slightly shorter tolerance for that kind of thing. And I do think that it did detract from my enjoyment of the book because, again, bits of this were fabulous, but the overall thing didn't really hang together ultimately. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, which is really, really disappointing because I was so looking forward to this book. I've been wanting to read this for years. It was impossible to get. It went out of print, and then it was independently published, and then it was pulled from shelves from the UK, and it was a whole thing. So yeah, that is a little bit sad. That does make me a little bit meh. But anyway, those are the 7 books that I read in the month of February. I would love to hear if you have read any of these or if there are any that are on your TBR. And I would also love to hear what your favorite or least favorite books of February were. That is it for today, and I will talk to you soon.